So I used to be a pastor, and I remember one time after service, this guy came up to me, and he said that he and his wife were having a disagreement about the Sabbath. He believed that they shouldn't work on Sunday, period, no matter what, and she thought it would be okay every once in a while to have to work on a Sunday. And I think this is a good question to ask, one that a lot of people probably have. I mean, keeping the Sabbath day holy is one of the 10 Commandments. It was so important that God himself modeled it for us during the creation process. And yet, when I was a pastor, I worked on Sundays, and Jesus didn't always observe the Sabbath. So what's the deal? Is this a contradiction in the Bible? Is it okay to make a different day our rest day? Or how bad is it really if we skip now and again? And what does the Bible have to say? Let's take a look.
Attention, bargain shoppers.
So you may have heard that the original Sabbath day was on Saturday, and this is true. In the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's no variation on that. In the Jewish culture, the Sabbath day was the last day of the week, Saturday. And this wasn't something that was changed by the early church or by Jesus and his disciples. It was a tradition that was influenced, as many of the cultures we practice today were, by paganism. The conventional thought is that the day of rest was changed to Sunday to coincide with the pagan worship of the sun god. You see, pagans had their own special day at the beginning of the week. It was known as the Venerable Day of the Sun, or Sunday. So fun fact, the name Sunday doesn't mean quite what you thought it meant. But does this even matter? I mean, the 10 Commandments were part of the Old Covenant, the Levitical law. And I actually have a video on do the Levitical laws still apply today? You can check that out here if you're interested. But I mean, Jesus and his disciples didn't observe the Sabbath. We see an example of this in Matthew 12, 1-2. At the time Jesus walked through the grain fields on the day of rest, his followers were hungry and began to pick off grain to eat. The proud religious law keepers saw this. They said to Jesus, "See, your followers do what the law says not to do on the day of rest." Now, in case you were wondering, Jesus and his disciples were not stealing grain. The law allowed people to just pick grain for their own consumption. As they're walking by, you can do that from like a random vineyard or field. You just weren't allowed to harvest the grain to sell. But also, this would not have been considered work by all of the religious teachings at the time. You see, the Pharisees were an especially strict religious sect, so they took all these laws to the extreme. Plus, they were looking for a way to embarrass Jesus, so the point is that Jesus challenged them and their notion of what the Sabbath was. And then later, Paul stretches this even further. When he was teaching about not getting bogged down in every little detail of faith, he says, "One person considers one day more sacred than another, another considers every day alike. Each one of them should be fully convinced in their own mind." Now this is interesting. On one hand, it kind of feels like Paul's saying, believe whatever you want to, as long as you yourself stick to it. And this is something that a lot of religious leaders today would be very uncomfortable with. But there is biblical precedent. Matthew 7, 1-3 tells us, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." So this verse is saying, whatever standards you determine for yourself, whatever you think is right in your mind, this is the standard that you will be held to. It's almost like God is saying he has way more of a problem with hypocrisy than he does with people believing the wrong things. And this is actually what Jesus points out in the Matthew 12 story about the grain. He observes that David and his companions went into the temple and ate the sacred bread that was only for priests. And that wasn't considered wrong in God's eyes. Matthew 12, 4-5 says, "He went into the house of God, and he and his companions broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests are allowed to eat. And haven't you read in the law of Moses that the priest on duty in the temple may work on the Sabbath?" So here Jesus is calling them out on their own double standard. The priests thought they were allowed to do the very thing that they were chastising Jesus for. And in their eyes, it's okay to do because they're priests, because they're elevated above everybody else. But Jesus is pointing out, really, that's hypocrisy. In regards to the Sabbath, do we need to hold to that today? And I would answer like this. When it comes to debating all these little minuscule religious laws and the fine points, the answer is usually going to be the same. God is not impressed by your rule following. God looks at the heart. And Jesus describes it perfectly when he said in Mark 2:27, "The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath." We need to rest. Studies have consistently shown that working straight through isn't as productive as having intervals of rest. That's how we were made to function. God even goes so far as to model this for us himself during the creation process. He rested on the seventh day, not because he was tired, not because he needed rest, but because he wanted to model how we should live our lives. Is he going to be mad at you for working on a Sunday? Not at all. But we should take consistent rest for our own benefit. Another thing to point out too is that the Sabbath was meant to take a break from work. But somehow we've turned it into this thing where the Sabbath is when we celebrate religious stuff. Go to church on Sundays. But the early church did not view it this way. In Acts chapter 2, we're told, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God. So worshiping God should be done every day of the week. And the Sabbath day should be a reminder to us to rest, to regroup, to take a break. These are really good and healthy things. So should we judge those who don't observe it or observe it in a different way? Absolutely not. Colossians 2:16 through 17 says, "So don't let anyone condemn you for what you eat or drink, or for not celebrating certain holy days or new moon ceremonies or Sabbaths. For these rules are only shadows of the reality yet to come, and Christ himself is that reality." So that's all I got for you today. I hope you found it interesting. If you did, please feel free to like and subscribe. It does help out the channel. I will leave the verses used today in the description below. Please feel free to leave a comment. My name is Adam. This is Bargain Bin Theology. And remember, you get what you pay for.